Format for differentiation. I'm Dr. Lisa Simser. Let's do some self-assessment. Grab some Post-it notes or some scrap paper and something to write with. I'll be asking you to think about your preferences and determine which from the list most represents you. I promise, you'll get more out of this video if you take the time to engage by writing these preferences down. Okay, let's go. What is your sensory preference? Do you prefer to learn about something by observing it or looking at pictures or video? Do you prefer to have someone explain it by talking to you and maybe by having an opportunity to have a conversation about it? Are you someone who gets information best by being fully immersed in it? You like to move around and be as active as possible when gathering information? Or do you do your best when the learning is hands-on or allows you to try the activity yourself, but you don't need to be so active, even though you like to touch and manipulate the information yourself when possible? Pick one, only one, and write it down. What is your organizational preference? You get to choose between 3 items here. Do you like information best when it's concrete, or do you like to ponder abstract ideas? Choose one of those. Do you like to do things in order, very sequentially, or would you actually prefer that information comes to you randomly? When you do a puzzle, do you like to look at the picture on the box first, or do you just head right to putting the pieces together? That distinction is the difference between whole to part, or preferring to start with the parts and build to the whole. You should have added 3 more words to your scratch paper. What about your personality preferences? There are 3 to choose from here as well. Would others describe you as an extrovert, someone who gets energy from being with people, or an introvert, someone who gets recharged when they're alone? Are you someone who makes decisions mostly from your intuition or on a gut level? Or do you have to have data before you can feel confident in a decision? Would others describe you as making decisions more emotionally or more logically? You should have a total of 7 items listed now. Lastly, you've likely heard about Gardner's multiple intelligence theory. He says that people have natural strengths and that typically one from this list seems to come to the top. When you look at this list, choose your top 2 for this activity today. Are you excellent in verbal linguistic tasks? Are you logical, mathematical? Do you have skills in managing and knowing yourself? That's an interpersonal strength. Or is your strength being bodily kinesthetic? Maybe you have skills in dealing with people. That's interpersonal. Maybe you have a talent for music or rhythm. Are you especially skilled in the natural sciences or when you're outside? And lastly, maybe you have talents in existential things, such as being able to instantly understand the big picture and the nuances of the situation. I know it's hard, but please pick out your top 2 from this list. As you look at your Post-it note, now think about all of the other people in your class who are watching this video and filling out their Post-it notes. How likely would it be to find another person in our class who has the exact same list of preferences? Not likely, right? Sure, there are people who are similar, but I have never, and I suspect you will never, have a class that is filled with students who all have the exact same approaches to learning. Everyone is so unique. How is a teacher ever able to meet all of the needs or even attempt to lean into most of these preferences? Bernice McCarthy was a kindergarten teacher who spent a lot of time thinking about that. She saw her students, little 5-year-olds, and noted that even at that early age, they each were unique and had very different preferences from each other. She set out to study learning preferences, personality, and social theory. She considered how she could apply the benefits of that research to the classroom. Her overarching question was, how do I intentionally reach more kids? It was in the 1980s that she developed the format system as a way to think about and plan for teaching with learner preferences in mind. Over the years, Dr. McCarthy has developed and updated the format wheel as a way to think about how individuals and groups process information. By using this wheel, we have 3 different ways to think about how to differentiate based on learning preferences. I'll be providing you a very abbreviated explanation, and if you want to know more, Dr. McCarthy's website at aboutlearning.com has significantly more details for you. The format wheel helps us to define learners, design varied instruction, and design varied assessments. When using the format system to define learners, we need to consider how our students approach learning. Often, the types of questions and requests they make can be a window into their preference. Quadrant 1 on this wheel represents Learner 1, and this is a student who really needs learning to be personal. They are always looking for a personal connection to what they're learning, and they typically aren't satisfied without knowing why they need to know this information and how it's relevant to their world. Providing this learner with the why and helping them to make the learning personal will be your best option for engaging them. Learner 2 is our most classic student, the one who loves school and wants the information presented clearly and directly. They want to know what is important, and they trust you to tell them. Learner 3 is a skills-centered student who typically asks questions about how things work or how they would apply this knowledge. Learner 4 is a creative thinker who's always looking for variations or adaptations to what you are teaching. This is the student who is quick to ask if-type questions and sometimes pushes well outside of your initial learning targets. Although it's fun to think about defining individual students in our classrooms, Abdurrahman is definitely a Learner 3, or Dara is a Learner 2. This typecasting doesn't actually help very much. What Dr. McCarthy suggests is that instead of working to identify individuals, it's time-consuming, and just when you figure them out, they switch. She suggests that we settle in on the idea that all 4 of these types exist in our classrooms. Just know that they are there, do what you can to allow for their preferences, and teach them with that in mind. Using the format system to design varied instruction is the second way to use it to differentiate. Dr. McCarthy suggests using the wheel as a sort of lesson plan, starting with Quadrant 1 and addressing how the lesson is relevant, explaining why the learning target is important. Do your best to provide personal meaning or establish buy-in at the beginning of the lesson. Next, move into Quadrant 2 with some direct instruction of the content. Teach the concepts and identify clearly what students should know or do. Then move to Quadrant 3 and allow students to practice their knowledge by using their skills to demonstrate how they can use this new information. Lastly, if the bell hasn't rung yet, the last part of the lesson, after students have mastered the knowledge or skill, you can move into adapting the new learning and considering if variations and new learning can grow from what was learned today. The format system is a different way of considering instruction and scaffolding in a sequence that builds for students through the why, what, how, and if cycle. Finally, format can be used to help teachers design varied assessment options for students. Providing varied assessments can boost student engagement, increasing agency, and quite honestly, makes class a lot more novel for the teacher too. Dr. McCarthy suggests that teachers consider multiple means of assessing, and using the format wheel will help assure that the assessment options are indeed different from each other. The meaning or why quadrant encourages us to create assessments that have a personal connection. If students were working on an American Revolution unit, an assessment from Quadrant 1 might be a journal where students pretend to be a person living through the revolution. Their writing would explain the events and key elements of the revolution, but they would be putting themselves into the history by writing a journal of their experiences. Learner 2 would like it if the teacher would offer a concept-centered task so they could clearly demonstrate what they've learned. A classic test would meet this goal. Learner 3 would probably like to create something related to the American Revolution. Maybe building a diorama to explain the events of the Boston Tea Party would be interesting to them. Learner 4 is a wonderful student to plan for because these are students who will probably want to design their own project. By providing them with the parameters and the learning targets, these learners will often ask if their idea would meet your expectation, and often they go well beyond what you had in mind. Offering varied assessments can be challenging, but using the format system to help you consider new options makes the process much more successful. Dr. McCarthy's format model is a great way to approach differentiating for the preferences of learners in your classroom. Try to plan for your learners, create varied instruction, and design varied assessments, and you're likely to see engagement and achievement increase in ways you hadn't imagined.